Welcome to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Maxwell Cooper, and in this podcast series, I interview physicians, medical innovators, and entrepreneurs making an impact on healthcare. This podcast is produced by DaVinci Academy, a multimedia medical education company that provides podcasts, video courses, and digital textbooks. You can see more on our website, www.dviacademy.com, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/DaVinci Academy Med. This podcast is sponsored by Doc2Doc, the personal lending platform designed for doctors by doctors. Do you have some big expenses in the near future? Maybe you're moving, applying to residency or fellowship, fixing up your car or home, or starting a new practice. Doc2Doc believes that traditional lenders overestimate the risk of lending money to doctors, residents, and medical students, focusing too much on the challenges of their financial past and giving them insufficient credit for the promise of their financial future. Check out Doc2Doc's personal loan options at doc2doclending.com/DaVinci. Hey everybody, welcome back to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I am honored this week to be joined by Dr. Harvey Castro, a ER physician and then a serial entrepreneur in the digital health space. And then he's also the author of a new book, ChatGPT in Healthcare. So we're going to learn all about ChatGPT and future applications. So Dr. Castro, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. So I gave you a little bit of background, but maybe start with like kind of the beginning, where you went to school, where you did residency, like where, what your practice looked like for a number of years, and then how you essentially got into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, the usual boring self. I went to undergrad at Texas A&M. I think early on, I was a little bit of an overachiever. Back then, I said I want a law degree, I want an MD, and I want an MBA. So I got two of the three so far. And back then, my entrepreneur spirit had already started years prior, and I started the biggest pre-med society at Texas A&M, and it's still there. And believe it or not, they had other societies, but the one I founded and the way I did it, it ended up being the biggest, and it's still the biggest. And fast forward, I ended up at University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas for my medical degree. At the time, it was interesting because no one else was doing problem-based learning. And I'm going to date myself. Back then, that was a thing. And so I was one of, I think out of the whole medical school class, I was one of 20 students that they were experimenting with. And I thought, hey, this sounds kind of cool. I'm down for this. And I'm glad I did it because I felt like I learned medicine a bit differently. I know now it's a common thing. That's how people learn. And then after that, I went to ER training at St. Luke's, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And I did a transition year in family practice before I did ER. And so that was kind of my journey, and jumped into the ER world just because I love the adrenaline. I love making quick decisions. And I don't know why, maybe it's a masochist in me, but I enjoy the stress. I live on stress, and I enjoy pushing myself to things that I normally don't do. And I think that's why I enjoyed ER so much, because you never know what's coming through those doors, and you have to be really good at what you do.
Sure.
And so as I moved forward, I kind of already knew that I wouldn't be able to be 60 years old and still do ER and still be able to pull those shifts and works, nights, weekends, holidays. That was not going to happen. So early in my career, I thought I need to make sure I do other things outside of medicine, or if I do medicine, combine the two so that I could create a new product or a new idea so that I could have another source of income. And then you had mentioned how did I get into entrepreneurship? Man, that's a hard one. I have to go back to I call it my why. Why do you do stuff? What is in your DNA? What's pushing you to do all these things that you're doing? And I have to kind of tell everybody, I started in a really humble beginning. I started in New York City. My mom, she was a teenager when she had me, and I was a first generation American, first college student. Grew up in literally poverty, very little means, to the point where it gave me this strong why today that I keep thinking, man, I don't want to go to that place ever again. So I'm constantly just figuring out different technologies, different ideas. The entrepreneur spirit in me is so hard to break. And every time I tell myself and my family, hey, I'm quitting, I'm done, I find something else that is just so exciting that I'm like, man, okay, I need to do this one because this one's exciting for me.
That's really cool. I think I saw you worked at Parkland Hospital in Dallas for a long time. That's like the big the county hospital there. I just I think I was telling you before we started recording, I was just finished a night stint of nights at our county hospital here in Atlanta. So it's that's I'm sure you saw the highest level of emergency medicine doing that.
Yeah, that was fun. It's just crazy, and it's everything. I mean, I've been cursed at, spit on, the whole nine yards.
Oh
And
yeah.
but you know what? I love it in a way because I love what I do. Just being in there, being in the grit, just helping people. And I know it's a disease state. I know things are going on that they may not be totally there, and that's why they act the way they do. And working at a county hospital, it's really humbling too, because you see
Mhm.
everything.
Oh yeah.
And from a life perspective, it's humbled me because I appreciate life even more. And sometimes I'm a little OCD with my kids or people around me. If they do something stupid, I'm like, hey, I've seen cases of this in the ER. Don't. And so I try not to do that. But it's just I guess the doctor in me. From that point, I've actually transitioned more. I'm focused on digital health, working for a company called Vital Health. I'm the chief clinical operating officer, and they have me working on several interesting projects, which is why I ended up working for them. Just they're doing some interesting things, and I'm just stoked about that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I guess I was reading about some of your earlier companies. You developed an app for medications and things like that, and then obviously built your own like freestanding emergency room company as well, which is pretty. How did you get? I guess were these kind of just obviously you had the bug very early, but I guess were these also kind of pain points you saw as as an end user, as a practicing physician, and I guess what led you to actually do something about it?
Yeah, I tend to be a doer. If I see something, it's almost a disease. I get it in my head, and until I do it, I'm not happy, and I won't stop. So that's probably not a good thing to be married and your wife telling you, hey, you need to chill a little, and it's a good balance. So I'm gonna throw that in there. It's good. And so to answer the question, I was in the emergency room. I was literally coding a patient. And the pain point was time. I thought I don't have time for this patient. And unfortunately, the nurse at the time, was common practice, would literally open up a textbook, find a drip, find the correct dose, and then start the drip. And I almost lost it. In my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, this person's gonna die, and we don't have time. Like, we need to how can I help to get it going? And then it dawned on me. I'm holding the new iPhone in my pocket. I'm like, I wonder if I could just create an app. So I literally taught myself how to write an app. It was very, very primitive. And it was called IV Meds. And believe it or not, it was in the top 10 in the world, and it killed it. And it was because I addressed the pain point and everybody loved. And it's interesting. I've talked to other ER doctors. They're like, oh my gosh, I used that app. And so it was kind of nice to hear. And so moving forward, I just had this pain point fixer mentality. And I created over 30 medical apps in the App Store. And big picture, I ended up selling the company. I ended up not doing that anymore. And that bug of creating products just didn't go away. So fast forward, I'm working in the emergency room, and I wasn't happy because I felt like I was being called into the principal's office, or like, hey, you're ordering too many CAT scans. Hey, you're not spending too much time with patients, but compared to everybody else, you're spending way more time than everybody else, all the other docs. And so I remember just talking to the administrator and saying, I'm here to be a doctor. I'm not here for anything else. And I get I need to save money, and I get I can't order certain tests. But at the same time, if I'm not ordering them, they don't have healthcare and they're not going to be able to get this test. And then I feel responsible for this patient. And I remember the administrators just being upset with me, and my boss giving me heck. And finally I said, you know what? I was actually a partner in the group. And I was making very nice, lucrative passive income from the group because I was one of the last members to join, and they ended up creating this amazing company that ended up selling. But I remember telling them, I don't care if this company's selling or not. I just want out. Just let me out. And I got out of my ownership, and I got very little for my ownership. If had I stayed, I would have made so much more. But I didn't want to sell myself short. And I went into this thing in Texas. It was a new thing called the freestanding ERs. And I thought, man, this is amazing. And I remember my colleagues looking at me like I was crazy. Like, you're going into something that we don't know what it is, and you may never come back, and you may never get a job, and all these horrible things. And I was like, I feel like that's just my personality. I can like sit down with the patient, I can spend an hour with the patient, I can roll out the red carpet. And I did that. I ended up helping create about, I want to say around 20 ERs for other people. And then finally I thought, I understand the medicine, I understand the business. Why not start my own brand? Why not create my own ERs, my own staffing company, billing company, just do all of it and create a better product in healthcare. And so I ended up creating these ERs, and since then I'm no longer with the company. I've moved on, but in the good way, I feel like I was able to give back to patients and have fun in my career and give medicine the way I felt needed to be given. And in that stage of my life, I thought, man, this is an amazing experience. Like, wow, not many people can say they got to do that. And so I felt blessed.
That's really cool and incredibly innovative. I'm curious, how does a freestanding, just from a logistics standpoint, how does a freestanding ER work? I mean, what if, like, if you have to admit somebody, or like, is it, I guess, maybe just a lot of ER medicine, I guess, as you know very well, like in some ways can be dealt with in, not, I don't want to say an outpatient basis, but like, that you could deal with it in a short amount of time and then they follow up with their PCP. Was that kind of the concept? I'm just curious how
Yeah,
that
no,
all
let's
works.
talk about it. So,
Yeah.
so the beauty of the ER, like you mentioned, you get the whole bell curve effect. You get those people that really need to be there, and you got people that, in their mind, they need to be there. But then, as a doctor, and you know the medicine, you're like, oh, this could have gone to the urgent care. This could have waited till tomorrow, and they don't know. And so I understand that. So, from a business point of view and platform, it's really smart. The companies that originally started this, the idea is allow the patient to come in, because to your point, you could argue that 90% of them end up back home. And that 10%, we did something called observation medicine. So we would keep them, we would rule out MIs, we would call the specialist to come see them, we would hold them. And in the state of Texas, I was allowed to hold people for 23 hours from the point they walked in. So in those 23 hours, my mission was to, maybe they're dehydrated, give them fluids, maybe they were in mild rhabdo, maybe I could do whatever I could to avoid the transfer. Now, obviously, if they're having an MI, or if they need some major surgery or an ectopic pregnancy, they're not going to sit in our ER. They're going to be transferred. But those cases are far and few in between. And what's really interesting, I almost felt like we pushed the envelope. I had specialists, surgeons, friends, that things that would normally go to the ER, we had them credentialed in our ER. And so they would come and do hand surgery or hand procedures. Some of our appendicitis cases, I would literally send them to the surgical center. And if they were closed, a lot of hospitals would just admit them and hold them till the next morning. So we're like, well, if you're just going to do that, why not just hold a patient here? And if something changes, then we can transfer in the middle of the night. But if not, then let's just transfer. So we literally would transfer. And I know some people would cringe. We would then send them to the surgical center. They would have the procedure and they'd go home. But for the patient, it was great because they saved money. They got amazing care, because instead of going to a hospital and being, one nurse to so many patients, they were just, one nurse. Or if we had a bunch of patients, we'd bring in extra staff, but they were getting amazing one-on-one care.
That's a really cool model. And I mean, I imagine that, you save them a hospital admission, which would save, both the healthcare system and the patient a lot of money. That's pretty cool. And then how you coordinated with a ambulatory surgery center, that's because a lot of these, like you said, like appendicitis, cholecystectomy, like those kind of cases, you could, do those on a lot of the surgeons thankfully now can do those on an outpatient basis, which is pretty cool. I guess so. You exited that company, is that right? And then I guess what did you move on to after that?
After that, I took time for me. I believe it or not, and I think most doctors can relate. Everybody's just go, go, go. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm in a good place in my life. Why not just take some time off? Then I literally got engaged and got married, and took a hiatus. And it was really nice. I focused on me, which was interesting because everything's always been about patience and getting to that next landmark, going through residency, going through med school, that first job, all that stuff. And I thought, I've never really slowed down. Maybe it's time that I just kind of enjoy. And so I remember the first time I literally had my first week off, I didn't know what to do. I was literally going crazy. But then as life continued, I was able to eat better. I lowered my cholesterol, lowered my blood pressure, lost weight. My emotional IQ went up. just happier. Not that I was upset or bitter, but I just had more time. And so after the wedding, my wife and I, we had discussed that once we're done with that, I'm gonna get back into working, but I was focused more on digital health and working remotely and not so much clinical, but more on the entrepreneur side, startups, telehealth, things like that. And then, ironically, this thing called ChatGPT came out, and I happened to be playing with it, and it gave me that aha moment where I thought, "Huh, this is exactly how I was in the ER with coding a patient, where I had this amazing feeling where I'm like, man, this could change lives. This could really have an impact." And so, me being a little OCD, literally wrote a book on it, and I wrote it within like 3 weeks, had it published within the month. And looking back, I have a little bit of bragging rights. I can say, you know what, I created the first ChatGPT in healthcare book. With that said, I wasn't happy with it. Me being a perfectionist, being a doctor, as you can relate, we're the worst critic. And so then
Hmm.
I looked at it and said, there's so much that has already changed in a month. I'm writing a second book, and I'm going to focus this one on patient care, because patients are the ones, like the first one was just like 10,000 feet high. How does this ChatGPT work, or just AI in general? Where can you put it? And I thought, man, what I really care about is the patient. Like, that's really what drives me towards healthcare. So I said, that's where the book over, always these cameras, this one over here, not that one over there, this one, ChatGPT, Unlocking the Potential of Patient Empowerment. That's where that one came from. And it's literally going over the ethics, the legal, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then showing a patient how to use it. Because at the end of the day, I know some people listening are like, man, he shouldn't be promoting that. The way I see it is doctors and patients are going to use this tool. And you can prohibit, you can block the IP address at the hospital, you can do all that stuff. At the end of the day, people are still going to do it.
Hmm.
And so, would you rather them do it correctly and understand the risk that they're going into, or just haphazardly go in and just do whatever? And so, I'm on the side of teach them the right way, and then teach them the good, the bad, the ugly, and then let that person decide how they're going to use it. And that way they know how to use the tool better, and they know how not to use the tool. And so, that's my big soapbox with ChatGPT, but it's been fun. I'm having a blast with it.
That's awesome. I'm curious, this is a newer thing. I feel like I'm hearing almost weekly now more and more about Chat GPT and its applications in healthcare. I think I saw an article in Forbes yesterday about it. I'm curious, it just came out in like, November 2022. Is that right? And then
Yes.
I guess for the people who may be still wondering, and even myself a little bit, maybe give us like an overview. What is Chat GPT? And I guess how is it at least initially being, used or thought to be used in healthcare?
Yeah, good question. So ChatGPT, my best example is, think of it as you're having a mentor, someone you can talk to about anything. And ChatGPT will have a conversation with you. And I know the common argument is like, well, I can go on Google and it can tell me anything I want to know. The difference is it generates a response on the fly. It literally does not go on the internet. It's going through their databases, and it gives you a response. And so, from a doctor's point of view, that sounds great. And there's some pros and cons, but how it's used and what it is, it's basically generating a response. And I have a hard time with this question. I've answered a million times, and I still don't know how to answer it, just because it does so much. But I like showing examples. For example, we're a physician, say you had a diabetic patient, you could go into ChatGPT and say, I need a low glycemic index diet, and I need it. This patient's allergic to eggs, and they also hate fruit. Give me a diet Monday through Friday, 3 meals a day for this patient. And ChatGPT will generate a diet with low glycemic index, and it will be conscious of all the things you said. But then you can take it to the next level and reply to it, say, okay, I need a grocery list and how much I need to buy of this. And it will calculate. And if you say, hey, there's a party of 2 at my house, we need 2 of us for the whole week, it will recalculate for everyone in the house. Then you can turn around and say, hey, I'm going to New York City and I need to follow this diet. What restaurants or what kind of foods should I stick to? And it will create that. And then say you wanted to create a discharge instruction, and say it was for someone that doesn't speak English. You could take that same thing and say translate to Spanish, and it'll translate it to Spanish. You cannot do any of those things in Google. And if you did, it would take you forever. And so from my point of view, the next question is, how can this be used in medicine? I like dividing the experience with ChatGPT into three categories: before seeing the patient, and then after the patient. So before the patient is basically medical students, residents, doctors. On that side of the world, we can put medical literature into ChatGPT and it could summarize. We can create note cards for it. We can create tables. There's a capacity of how much information you can put in it, but you could put it in bits and get those summaries. So from a tool educational point, I see that as a use. On the patient side, the same thing, but the problem on the patient side is they're not doctors. They don't have that experience. And so when they put information in, there's a couple of biases. The way they put it in may not be the same inputs that you and I would put it in, because we're doctors, we speak medical language and we can talk to it in the way a doctor does. And so the output that comes out of ChatGPT is going to be different from even you and me, because we have different specialties. But then on top of that, from a patient, that's totally different. And so the problem on the patient side using it is that there's this thing called hallucination. Basically, a respectful way, I call it a great carsman, a sell, or whatever, because it can tell you anything, but you don't know if that's true or false. And the worst part is it could be half true, half false. So for the patient, I recommend, if they're using that information, to run it by a doctor, because ultimately that doctor is going to know yes or no. And not just any doctor, because obviously if it's talking about cardiology and you bring it to a dermatologist, they may be like, yeah, it looks good to me. But in reality, it could be wrong because that's not their field. The other part a patient can do is be better prepared. So they can create questions and say, okay, I have diabetes. I'll stick to that example. And I need to ask my doctor, what kind of questions should I ask? Well, it'll come up with questions and follow-up questions. So with the average doctor only spending 13 minutes with a patient, how amazing would it be for a patient to come in prepared? I know some doctors are cringing out there saying, oh my gosh, they're going to ask me all this stuff. It'll be like Dr. Google days. But in reality, I think it'll be better because they'll be very prepared, very efficient conversation. And then they can say, hey, I read this online, be it Google or be it ChatGPT, and say, hey, what do you think? And now that elevates the education level, elevates the care. And then therefore, I think you'll have better preventive medicine. You'll have better care for the patient. On the patient interaction side, I see ChatGPT being used more on the doctor side. And I know doctors aren't supposed to be doing this, but they are. They're going in and typing in symptoms of a patient and saying, hey, what could it be? Help me with the differential diagnosis. And so I caution doctors with doing that because of the hallucination effect. But if they have enough medicine background and understand the pros and cons, then, again, they're going to end up doing it anyway. But I see that as a good use. The last part that I like talking about and just kind of sharing with others is the ability to give good discharge instructions. I fell in love with this example. This hospital in the United Kingdom basically took pediatric asthma discharge instructions and fed it into ChatGPT. One of the advantages of ChatGPT, you can convert the way it speaks and say, talk to me in the language of like a 5-year-old. And so it gave discharge instructions at a 5-year-old level. But what I thought was amazing is that it dissected something that normally would go to the parents, to a child. And then on top of that, this was brilliant. They went into Dolly and created a coloring book and created the two and made it into a book and basically gave it to the child and said, this is how we're going to discharge children from this age to this age with asthma exacerbation. And I thought, man, how amazing, because now you're really taking this technology to the next level. You're giving personalized care. And that's one of the things you can change with ChatGPT. You can kind of convert the way it talks. You're using another AI to create the coloring book. And from a child's point of view, I'm thinking, wow, I can teach a child all I want, but after about 30 seconds, they're like running out the door, trying to do something else. And I only have so much time. And then from the parents, if they're not in that space of educating, they're only going to be able to read the discharge instructions. Half of them will throw them away and they're not getting much. But then this way, the child's coloring, looking at it, having questions, taking it in. And I thought, man, this is the way to change medicine. This is another way of helping our patients. So I know that was a little bit long, but kind of wanted to give those examples.
No, that was an excellent overview. And, I think you hit on a lot of great points there, especially like patient education. I think both before, during, and then after the visit, I feel like patients always, they always have questions, or they don't, they didn't write everything down that the doctor. So I think good discharge instructions, I always remember like like when I was an intern, like doing all these like epic auto populate
Yeah.
discharge instructions and all that. And as I'm
Yeah.
sure you've done before.
Oh yeah.
And I sit there and wonder, are they going to read all this? Are they really like, and I think having, that was brilliant. Like making a coloring book for a child so they can understand it. Cause they're not going to understand the pathophysiology of asthma and like how it manifests and all that. I
Yeah.
think most adults probably wouldn't unless they're in
No.
healthcare.
No. And then especially compliance, taking the
Yeah.
inhaler and checking and take the inhaler. I thought, man, this is so huge. Like I would love to do a study on it and see how many patients were not coming back, just because they were doing a
Mhm.
better job keeping asthma at bay.
Sure, sure. So I'm curious from the standpoint of, and it sounds like you touched on some of this in your latest book. Like, I guess the regulatory aspect and the legal
Mhm.
aspect of this is, because people could say, well, if they're, using this at home and it tells them, don't go to the ER or do go to the ER, like what's the liability there? I guess it is, and maybe that's probably hasn't been fully figured out yet. But I guess where do you see that kind of shaking out?
Yeah, this is why I'm so stuck on just going out there and giving my talks and just helping because my biggest fear, and I know that sounds crazy, one of my biggest fears is that someone out there is going to self-diagnose. It's going to stay home in a silent MI and may pass away because ChatGPT told them that everything was fine. And I know that sounds extreme, but to take it to another level, I'm more worried of countries outside the United States because they can actually self-prescribe, self-diagnose, self-subscribe to X and Y medication. And it worries me because if they do that, then what if they don't even have the disease? So number one, they're freaking out about a disease they may not have. Second, they may give themselves medicine that may not be indicated or maybe antiquated or something that on the books, we learn about medicines that are out there, but nobody uses them. That's not even indicated, but the ChatGPT may say so. And so now we're really bumping into a lot of ethical and legal issues. And so to answer your question, I made an algorithm on my second book to kind of walk you through that particular scenario because I'm worried that patients are going to end up using this like Dr. Google. And the scarier part is they can customize it so much that it sounds even more real. And so I'm very worried. And from a legal point of view, who ends up with the responsibility of this? Ironically, would not be OpenAI. It's going to fall back to, depending how it's used, the patient. If the patient just self-diagnosed and try to claim that ChatGPT told me, because they have warnings on ChatGPT saying don't. And then obviously the user agreement that we all sign on websites that nobody ever reads, it's in there that they're not going to be held liable. So I think it'd be hard for them to be sued. What's really interesting from legal part is depending how the tool is used will determine if it needs FDA approval. And now it just becomes more complicated because depending how it's used, if the FDA says, "Yep, this AI is a medical tool, and it's not FDA approved for this," then depending again how it's used, some companies unscrupulously or not knowing may end up doing things that will cross the line with the FDA, and I can see lawsuits coming that way. From another ethical point of view, just to bring out completeness, you have to remember these databases are based on research. And if you think of who has been researched as a medical student, we know that there's biases in the populations that are studied. So if some population has more funds to be studied for that particular disease, and that disease will be more represented in our databases. And not that it's more important, but it just got funded. And then in theory, it seems more important. And then even worse is the therapeutic treatment for that population may be totally different from another population. And so now ChatGPT is kind of pushing and reinforcing biases, and that's even more scary. And so how do I see this story ending? I think in the future, near future, we'll have something called BioGPT, or just call it generically some other GPT out there that will be strictly related to healthcare. That the database itself is not going to have law and other facets. It's going to be strictly healthcare, and it's going to have EMR records in the sense that it's just have like the information, no names, no HIPAA violation. It'll just have the bones of what's inside the EMR. So like the patient history and where they discharged with this and the how often did patients go home with chest pain, stuff like that. But then it'll help the probability. And so I can give a real example as an ER doctor. I could put in the following symptoms and then it spits out, okay, this person has a 60% chance of MI, 10% for AAA based on the data you've put in. And so then now this becomes a better tool, because now it becomes just like using my smartphone, just becomes another tool in my stethoscope. So I foresee, I don't know how many years in the future, but I could see a future in maybe 5 years where it just becomes standard of care. And then once it becomes standard of care, now we've run into other ethical and legal issues, because if those doctors that do not use ChatGPT, technically you're not going with the standard of care, and now you can be sued for not using it. So that is coming as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I'm curious, in my field of radiology, as you know, people have been talking about AI, replacing radiologists for years and being kind of these grandiose predictions of the future and that. And, that obviously hasn't happened, even not even close yet. But we are seeing more and more of it being adopted and being a tool, like you said. And I think a lot of radiologists in the space are, looking at it as almost in a way like when we switched from plain film, actual films to, electronic packs and things like that. And that if you don't adopt it, you're probably going to get left behind. I'm curious, from the standpoint of, the ER primary care clinics, where I think this probably would have a lot of use is, some people may initially knee jerk and say, oh, is this going to replace PCPs or ER doctors? And, I would think you would agree as well. As I don't think so, at least in the probably our lifetimes. But I guess as a tool, how do you see it more like, obviously with that diagnosis, then do you see it even getting into like recommending treatments and things like that? I guess, how do you see it being like continuing to evolve as a tool we use?
Yeah, my favorite statement that I say is AI is not going to replace you. It's not using AI that's going to replace you. And from an administrator, at one point I was a CEO of a hospital system, and I can honestly say those doctors that fought me with their not wanting to use a keyboard, not wanting to type, not wanting to use EMR, pushing that they really wanted to use paper charting, were the ones that I'm like, man, why am I having you work for me if you're such a pain, to be blunt. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'd rather have a physician that is versed with just the basic keyboard, is not asking me for a subsidy to have someone type for them, than the ones that could just do it. And so fast forward, how do I see this play out? I think from a medical, legal, ethical point, I do see a future where this tool will help decrease the risk of patients and decrease adverse outcomes, to the point where the AI will say, you know what, this person came in with back pain and chest pain, and you didn't even ask the questions for AAA, and they went home with the AAA or something. It would avoid it, because it's literally AI. I already know this technology exists. It's listening to the patient interaction. It's charting the patient interaction. And then you have a risk management tool that's checking off the list and making sure that these things were done. And so fast forward, who would I hire, or what platform would I hire? I'd want the one that's the safest for my patients. And so to answer your question about giving recommendations, it would be giving recommendations. And will it replace the doctor? No. And will it be a threat to a doctor? Not at all. At the end of the day, it's the human being that needs to give that approval to say, you know what, I agree, or no, this is way off. I disagree. And this is where our medical gestalt kicks in, and our gut feeling and our experience. You could feed that all into a computer, but that element of emotional intelligence, where you go into a room and you're like, something's wrong, and you keep digging, even though all the data is telling you otherwise, like, no, this patient could go home, but your gestalt tells you, no, there's something wrong, and I'm going to keep digging here. I have a hard time believing that ChatGPT will get to that level. It might, but I just have a feeling that at the end of the day, it's always going to be the doctor that's going to give it its blessings.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think it sounds like a ChatGPT, kind of like how a lot of AI algorithms in radiology are being developed, is like initially just even triaging patients, like they're, because we'll have as a radiologist, we'll have like this big list of studies we have to read. And like, you could have like a positive PE sitting there, but if you're, just kind of going down the list, you may not get to it till later. And so like having AI kind of identify that, I'm wondering, do you see that, especially like in the emergency room, helping quickly identify patients where like, yeah, maybe we should probably pay a little bit more attention to this patient quicker than some. Do you see that kind of playing out as well?
Oh my gosh, yes. Just to give you an interesting example, there's cameras, and I flipped out when I heard this and I read about this. There's cameras that just looking at you gives you a blood pressure. And I'm like, how in the world does that even work? And so I see a future where you walk in and it's literally this camera that already knows your temperature, your blood pressure, your vitals. It knows if you're changing. You're just sitting there waiting and it already knows. And then based on your symptoms, it almost tags you like a camera and says, okay, this person has this, and it's starting to risk stratify you. And then you in triage, if you have 100 patients, you're like, okay, where are the ones or which ones? And it's better than what we have today, you know? And so, for example, women can have the atypical MI. And so if someone came in with back pain or jaw pain rather, 2 in the morning, maybe the triage nurse may not catch it, but if you have that as an algorithm, it would flag it and say, no, this person's actually high risk. They need to come, even though the vitals and everything else looks good. And it's something as minute as jaw pain. No, this could be an MI.
That's really interesting. I guess kind of a provocative or ethical question in a way. I actually did a podcast episode with a medical ethicist on AI and radiology. He does a lot of like ethics of AI and radiology. And we were talking about like if the AI algorithm in the case of like a radiology algorithm identifies like a pulmonary nodule, and then the radiologist looks at it and goes, oh, I don't think that's real. And then it turns out it was real and the patient has cancer. Where does the liability fall? And I realize this, this is probably early in, but I guess I'm just curious your take on, if the ChatGPT said, hey, like this, you should probably, get a CT scan and, this patient may have a dissection or something like that. And, as a physician, you say, yeah, it doesn't really fit, it doesn't seem like it. And then they end up having it. I guess where do you see that liability falling? Like, is it the physician that entirely takes it? Does it go on the ChatGPT, developer? I guess, where do you see some of that kind of playing out?
Yeah, until ChatGPT becomes the standard of care, it'll always fall on the doctor, always. Once ChatGPT becomes the standard of care, then it's easier to blame ChatGPT, or I hate saying ChatGPT because it's not going to be ChatGPT. It'll be some generic GPT out there that's being developed. Then that will be held liable. And then lawyers will start going after the company and the developers that created the product because that's the standard of care and it made a mistake.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because it could also say, I guess, that everything's fine, and then the doctor disagrees with that. So, but yeah, which is kind of interesting. I guess I'm also curious, like where do you see like where do you see this going? 5-10 years from now, like as far as being in. Do you see this like in every ER, every outpatient clinic, on the wards? Like I guess, what maybe in critical care, like where do you see kind of like other applications that maybe haven't been explored or are still early in the process?
No, that's a good question. I take a big sigh on that one because I honestly think in my heart and soul that AI is here to stay. Just yesterday, ChatGPT announced their API going out, and I know I'm almost counting. I want to count how many days before a developer. I say days, because I really think in the next few days we're going to hear some major company come out saying, "Oh, we have ChatGPT in healthcare," because it's going to be in every industry. And to take it another level, everybody's used to Grammarly or autocorrect or your Alexa or your Siri. That is how I see AI going in. It's going to be in every industry, marketing, in healthcare. Let's keep it healthcare. It'll be on our websites. It'll be in our patient interactions. And so how do I see this playing out? I honestly think it's going to be everywhere to the point where people won't realize that it's being used, but it will be used. And so to your point of all the questions you ask, I think it's all of the above. Every single industry, it may not, in some industries, like you said, may lend itself more than others. And so you made a great example. Radiology has been adapted really quickly. Whereas, for example, pathology is another good one because it can look at pathology slides and make the doctor more efficient and get diagnosis quicker. And the doctor can see even more with less time. And so moving forward, the future is kind of scary. And this is why I talk about it, because I feel like we need to create these tools, but we can't let Microsoft create these tools. We need to have doctors that are listening to this and saying, you know what, I want to be a leader. I want to be the one that's creating this tool. And I want to be the one that's facing this with patients, because at the end of the day, we know medicine. Microsoft doesn't know medicine. We understand how to take care of patients. Business people don't know how to take care of patients because they look at it with different lenses. So why not advocate for other doctors, healthcare providers to go out there and be a leader in this technology so that when the end product is made, then it becomes a true product for our patients. And so that's why I literally wrote the book, because I'm wanting to do that. Now, do I make any money on the side for doing this? No, not at all. But do I enjoy it? Yes. And will I continue doing it? Yes. And so I'm hopeful to be that leader, be that advisor for different companies out there to help them create these new products to help our patients.
That's really cool. I think that's an excellent point that, doctors, the end users really should be driving this, that, like you said, the big corporations have big different motivations, and it may not all be bad. They have obviously developed many great products, but they just they don't know what they don't know in a lot of ways. And I think that's an excellent point. I think kind of segueing a little bit, like, I know you do a lot of advising now for companies as well. I guess, is it in the realm of GPT, or is it even broader than that? I guess, what are some kind of the advising roles you're carrying on these days?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I'll talk about the one that everybody will be like, oh, that's kind of cool. The first one that's kind of fun. I'm working for a telemedicine company called Vital Health, and I'm their chief clinical operating officer. And that's just the usual telemedicine. And we're doing some things they don't want me to discuss just yet, because it's things in development that we're gonna announce here in a few months. But big picture, I'm excited, and that's fun because I'm able to incorporate just AI in general to what I'm doing and create new products for patients that I just mentioned. One of the other companies that I'm working for, I'm really stoked about. It's amazing. And obviously I'm biased because I'm working for them, but I'm an advisor for them. So here's the skinny. It's really cool. Say you have an iPad, and they created this ultrasound transducer. And the concept is creating ultrasound where the AI is helping any person that's never studied ultrasound to do their own scans. And so then this machine would basically, you could take it home, you would scan, say, breast cancer, or you're doing, say you had a PE or DVT rather, and you want to scan, it would walk you through it, and it would tell you, no, you're not pushing hard enough, no, to the right, to the left, deeper. And then it would take pictures and send it to the radiologist. And so this idea is going to morph into medical schools, ER training to do your FAST exam, nurses and doctors to get IV access. So I'm thinking, man, this has so many uses. How amazing. So I've been helping the company come up with different ways of using it. They had a certain scope that they were looking at. And then after I started working with them, now I'm kind of giving them different verticals in medicine that they can really focus on and work on. So that one is really exciting. The name of the company is Pons, out of New York, actually New Jersey. And it's on my LinkedIn. The other one that's some people are going to cringe out there, and I almost didn't do it because of it, but I thought this is going to help patients. And what it is basically medicinal marijuana. And I know half the people are already freaking out there saying, oh my gosh, he's advocating marijuana. I'm not advocating marijuana. I'm advocating medicinal marijuana. And what the company did was interesting. They're actually have clinical trials in Germany that have already started. And what this company does is pretty simple and smart. They created a transfuser that has different types of cannabis. And so it has different concentration, different types of cannabis. So you as a doctor, say I'm your patient, and I say, hey, I'm suffering from anxiety. You could literally create on your smartphone the dose and say, it's more anxiety. So it'll give me different types of cannabis. And then I have a diffuser that talks to my phone, and it's talking back and forth. And then I use the cannabis, and it's working on anxiety. And then I have less side effects because it's working more on the anxiety. But let's just say I suffer more insomnia and I have to be up and running the next day. Well, then you can dial it up towards the indications for insomnia. Then I use the medicine through the diffusers, talk to my phone so it can adjust. And I thought, man, that is the way to use this. So you're giving the right amount for medical, and it's only for medicinal purposes. And they have certain indications. And then so they started in Germany, and they're supposed to be here in the United States in the next 2 years. But I thought, man, that's kind of cool. I know it's out there, but I think I see it as just like any other drug that's out there. It's just different. It just has called cannabis, but the way I see it, it's used in a medical way.
That's a wide variety of advisory roles there. That's pretty cool. You're kind of have your hands in all different types of endeavors. That's pretty cool. I'm curious, what's your advice for, physicians out there that want to do a little bit more than just practice medicine? They want to, be an advisor to a company or bring that clinical perspective to new technologies being, I guess, what's your advice on, I guess, one, like finding those opportunities, and two, like, I guess, finding ways that they can offer the most to helping develop, these technologies? Because I think we need more physician input on a lot of these different things.
Yeah, good question. That's a tough one. I think it's just being an advocate. So if you're a pediatrician or you're a radiologist, whatever your angle of medicine is, I think that's where you should advocate for. And I would encourage you to be on LinkedIn, encourage you to be on social media. Obviously, don't violate any HIPAA laws. If your hospital's against you videotaping X, Y, and Z, don't. But my point is, you want to have a voice and you want to create that what I call digital footprint. You want to have information out there. You want to be an advocate for your patients. So I encourage you to write articles, post them on LinkedIn, submit them to Forbes magazine, get your name out there because people out there are watching. And so other companies will start approaching you and saying, hey, we are working on product X and we see you are an expert in your field for Y. Why not work with us? That's the passive way of doing it. And I know that sounds really active. The active way of doing it would be literally find out your niche, find out what it is that you're really good at, and look for companies in that niche that would love to have you on their team as their medical advisor, as their medical officer. There's just so many things that are out there, but if you're not looking, you will never find it because you're not even looking for it. So those would be my top 2 tips.
Oh, that's great. Great advice. Great advice. I guess as we wrap up here, I want to ask you something that I ask every guest is when you're not, building companies and doing new technologies, I guess, how do you find that balance? What are your passions outside of work? If that's possible.
Yeah, no, I've tried my best to create an environment where it's 8 to 5 or maybe 9 to 5. I try my best and those are my working hours. And if something's outside of that hours, I try my best to fight it or reschedule or make up time. And I try my best to incorporate time with what matters, which is my kids, my wife, my loved ones, my mother. And so I purposely schedule time. And I know that's easier said than done. I know at times I fail. I know I'm not doing a great job because I get overwhelmed with all the things I want to do. And I'm a little OCD that I'm like, no, I need to do this. But to give you an example, literally today, after this podcast, I told my wife, let's go on a lunch date and we're going to go out and have fun and have lunch and enjoy. And I'm made it a point that every Friday I make sure we go on a date as well. And then on the weekends, I make sure I don't do anything if I can avoid it. And I just spend time and it's dedicated to my family. And I am there. I'm unplugged from technology and I'm 100% present for my wife. And I have a stepson that he's 7 years old and he plays soccer. So I make it a point to go to his games, coach him, play with him, do stuff so that I am balancing life.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Finding that balance is important. I guess the last thing is where can people find out more about what you're working on, find the book, buy the book, those types of things and connect with you as well.
Yeah. I'm on all the major social media platforms and my handle is Harvey Castro, MD as in medical doctor. And I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. So if you can friend me on LinkedIn, that'd be great, or follow me. I post a lot of things on AI and entrepreneurship, and I'm about to ironically create an AI podcast that's coming out in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So stay tuned on that one. That'll be fun. And then as far as the book, it's on Amazon, paperback and Kindle edition. I highly recommend both of them, but obviously I mentioned I'm biased towards the second one, so I would kind of push you more towards the second one. Unless you've never heard of any of these things, then maybe the first one would be a good quick speed read. But the second one I think you'll enjoy. And literally as we speak, I am working on submitting my third book, and it's about biohacking and losing weight. And I hope to have that out in the next 2 weeks.
That's awesome. Well, you're certainly a very industrious and productive guy. That's pretty cool. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor and it was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DaVinci Hour podcast, presented by DaVinci Academy. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your podcast platform of choice to catch the latest episodes. Please leave a comment or a review and share it with a friend. Lastly, you can find all of our podcasts, video courses, and books on our website, dviacademy.com. Thank you for listening.